Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SALTO Digital Dialogues once again. We have a very exciting set planned for you today, and this is already the last session of the autumn season in 2024. But we are not quite there yet. We have an exciting 35-40 minutes in front of us. So while some people are still filing in, let's get, as usual, to the basics of what it is that we do here with these few guidelines. Yeah. So, just some technical guidelines. We are being recorded, or we are recording all these sessions as usual, and the recording will be shared on YouTube afterwards. So if you are watching live and see something that you like, do share this with colleagues after the fact. As you might have already noticed, you are unable to turn your microphones and cameras on purpose, but there is a very handy Q&A panel in Microsoft Teams, and we hope that you do use it to ask our guest speakers some deep and interesting questions during the input or in the end. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, we cannot really help you right now, but as usual, make sure that you are updated in the latest version of the application, no matter what platform you use. That usually helps with any technical issues. Yeah. These sessions are aimed mainly for national agency staff, but now if you are not from national agency staff, you are connecting from somewhere else, do not disconnect. Or if you are watching on YouTube, don't press stop yet, because this is stuff about digital transformation and how it connects to the fields of education and youth work. So this hopefully is useful for a wide crowd. And it all boils down to how digital transformation and digital technology can be applied in education, in youth work, and especially how it applies in the context of the European programs, Erasmus Plus and European Solidarity Corps. So that's what we are talking about. Now, if you're wondering, today we are talking about impact assessment, and that doesn't necessarily sound directly like technology related at all. While it is, of course, related, and I would even say that assessing impact of digital transformation or digital youth work, for example, might be even harder than the work in general. But we are here not looking so much at technology itself. So we are not that interested in how, let's say, a certain piece of VR glasses works, or how a certain other piece of immersion technology works under the hood. But we are more talking about the implications that it has on the digital education field. Yeah. And if you have wonderful ideas on what we should talk about in the next season, because we will be continuing early next year again as well, please do let us know in the email that is displayed here on the screen. So give us all your excellent ideas. Without further ado, then, I would invite our guest speaker of the day to the stage. So welcome Gert Boutsen from Belgium. We've bumped heads with him a lot of times, but I'll let him more explain his background when he starts. So the stage is yours, please.
Okay, good afternoon. As you said, my name is Gert Boutsen, and I'm a lecturer at the University College of Leuven, and I'm active in the education of youth workers, social workers, youth workers, mainly, and I'm doing some research together with colleagues in the field of youth work, and that's what I wanted to present today. I want to talk a little bit more about our research on making the impact of youth work visible. That was to start. Let's go to the presentation. I try to share it with you. Then I can start my story. So I try to bring my my story on making the impact of youth work visible, and why it's so important. And as you have said, we are not focusing on the more digital part or more instrumental part of measuring impact, but we are more focusing on the process that we are aiming for in this important topic. So I'll first bring my story about the research I did together with a colleague, and afterwards I come up with some lessons learned, and at the end I have some questions that we can discuss on later on. So to introduce ourselves, presentation. Okay. Why did we start with a research on the impact of youth work? My colleague Timmy Boutsen, who is a staff member of the Ambrassade, which is the umbrella organization on Flemish youth work, and myself as a researcher in the UCLL. We started our research with the idea to collect ideas, opinions, knowledge, and different views on what impacts can mean for the sector of youth work. Our biggest ambition was to share our lessons learned with everybody who wants to listen to that story and who is interested. So that's why we are here today. And in the end, we try to find impact allies, as we say. We try to set up an international network. We share our knowledge, and maybe in the future we can insist projects together. Where did we start our story? And we were at some point, and it was at the European Academy on Youth Work, and that was where I met with Juha as well. It was the edition in 2018, and I was there together with my colleague Timmy. And at that point, we were confronted very hard with the European agenda on measuring impact, making the impact visible. At the time that we were in Flanders, not aware about this topic, and we were especially not focusing on this. We were working on, let's say, the DNA of youth work, the last safer book, which was mentioned here, dated from 2015. It was the last time that our government brought together a lot of data on youth work. So it's almost 10 years ago. There was a research on the value of youth work, and that was happening in our Flemish situation, but European-wide, there were a lot of very interesting events, agendas that focuses on the impact of youth work. And it convinced us to think about why it was important to make the impact of youth work visible. We were always convinced about the power of youth work. Youth work works as a hashtag we always use in Flanders when we're talking about youth work, but the data and evidence is rather thin. There is, of course, an ongoing discussion on what methodological part is best suited to collect and provide the evidence, and there is a kind of increasing awareness on that. But we were strongly convinced that if we want to have a better recognition on the value of youth work, we have to improve the quality of youth work and to make the impact of youth work visible. And it started in 2018. Youth Work Works is, let's say, a document where we talk about the DNA of Flemish youth work, where we talk about the effects of Flemish youth work, and that's the starting point. In 2019, there was the European Charter on Local Youth Work, and there are a few phrases on quality of youth work and the measurable indicators and aims that are needed to show the impact of youth work. In the report of the Academy were some phrases on providing evidence of youth work is becoming increasingly important. We were aiming to have more instruments on transparency and accountability. It was in this report, of course, in the final declaration on the Third European Youth Work Convention. There were some phrases on better showcasing the impact of youth work. In 2021, there was the study on youth work in the EU from the European Commission, and the last recommendation at member state level was to raise awareness of the impact of youth work on the basis of further evaluation research on the value of youth work. So reasons enough to start research on the impact of youth work in Flanders, and we had two main goals in our research: to clarify the concept of impact, what is impact for the youth work sector in Flanders, and why it is important in youth work. And the second mission was to translate into an application that should make the impact of youth work visible. And during our impact research, we changed a little bit this goal. At the first point, we were sure or convinced about the idea that we have to develop an application that should make the impact of youth work visible. But during our research, we changed a little bit more into the direction that it is very important to start a process to make the impact of youth work visible. So starting point was an application, and in the end, we came to the insight that the process is very important. So I try to guide you a little bit more through our impact research, and we are focusing on the three topics: why, what, and how. When you want to know all the insights on our research, there is a website called impactvanjeugdwerk.be, and everything behind this main framework is at that website. Unfortunately, it's not in English for the moment. We are working on this for the translation, but I'll guide you to the three main focuses of the impact. About the why. We talked with a lot, before we start with the why, I have to talk a little bit more about some definitions on impact. We found a lot of definitions, and we focused our work on the second one, that when you talk about impact, we talk about positive and negative, primary and secondary long-term effects produced by a development intervention, directly or indirectly, intended or unintended. So these very different angles to look to impact are very important for us when looking to the impact of youth work. We have different views on impact. You can talk about the impact as a long-term effect of one specific practice. You do one thing, and in the end, this is your effect. But you can talk about impact as a long-term effect to which a practice can contribute. It's more the contribution theory that we take into account to have a look on the impact of youth work, and that's where we were focusing on. We are strongly convinced that everything youth workers are doing in their practice are contributing to the impact of youth work on the lives of young people as such. The third vision on impact is that you are looking to the topic of impact as a meaning and a value. The purpose of the practice is the practice itself. You don't have to prove anything. Youth work is important. Statement, full stop. In our research, we started from the second view on impact. And then the three topics on output, outcome, and impact. When you're talking about the direct practice and you have activities, then you're talking about output and direct results. When you're talking about the medium-term effects, then we are talking about effect. And when you're talking about long-term effects, then you're talking about the impact. Later on, we developed an impact framework for the youth work field in Flanders, and there we're talking about more the effects and not only about the impact. But as I talked about before, we start on the why of impact. And then we talked with a lot of youth workers and youth work organizations in Flanders, and we tried to bring together the objectives of making impact visible. And we developed this kind of a framework. We do think that when you're talking about making your impact visible, you can have an internal perspective and an external perspective. Two perspectives and main goals. Sometimes you want to make your impact visible to report about your practice, and at the other side of the line, we think about the objective to make your impact visible, to reflect on your practice. And when we created this framework, and you have a look on the internal side of your practice, and you want to report, or on the report side, then helps to make your impact visible. That helps to give language to what a youth worker does. Often when you ask a youth worker, what's your role towards children? What are you doing? It's very often that the youth workers are not so skilled in talking about their own practice and their own profession. We do think that when you start making your impact visible, that this gives language to what a youth worker does in his daily practice. At the other side, at the internal part within your own organization, and when you talk about the impact of your activities and you start reflecting, then we are convinced that you strengthen your own youth work practice. We're talking about raising quality in your own practice. That's a second goal of making your impact visible. When we go to the external part, then we come at the report side to the part that we all know. The government is asking what is your impact, and you want to show your impact and to bring all the data to the government and to get recognition and to account for resources. That's a very obvious part, but the last part, and that's mainly important in our research, is when you start reflecting on what you measured in your impact within the broader field of youth work, then you can tell a way better the story of youth work to the broader society. So it's very important before starting, and that's one of our conclusions later, before you start in your exercise to try to make your impact visible, to think about one of these 4 focuses, objectives, goals, before you start your impact measurement of making it visible. Sliding a little bit more to the what part, then we defined the impact of youth work on different levels. And then we came to 4 levels, and of course, you can find a lot of more details on that in our website, but we are strongly convinced that youth work has impact on the personal life of young people. Young people who are taking part in youth work are becoming more skilled persons towards the futures. Their attitude will evaluate, their thinking about what is happening in society changes, so there is a direct impact on the life of young people. Secondly, we are convinced that youth work has an impact on the immediate environment, the neighborhood, the community where youth work is active in. We are convinced that where youth work is active, the life of people together in their own environment is way better. Third, we are convinced that there are more social and civic outcomes. and it has a relationship with stronger chances on the labor market, for example, or people are doing better in schools. Young people are doing better in schools. So it has an effect on the broader environment of young people. And the last part is that we do think that youth work has an impact on the political level, on policy making. At the one hand, youth work is often able to bring all the needs from youngsters together and to bring it to politicians. Advocacy as that part. And second, we do think that young people who are involved in youth work are better citizens later on in their lives, and they are convinced that taking part in policy is very important to build a better future for youngsters, but for people in general. We based our analysis on these two studies were made in Europe and who told us a lot more about the impact of youth work in youth work. Third, when we talk about the how, and that was the most important and interesting part, then we start our cycles with the first part. When you want to show your impact, you have to think about the why. And that's always your starting point. Why do we have to make our impact of our own practice visible? And when you defined one of the four goals in the four angles of the framework, then you have a starting point. And then you go to plan how to make your impact visible, and that's always start with making a theory of change. What do you want to achieve in your own practice? Do think about it, and do think on the long term what you want to achieve, and take all these different steps in the theory of change before going to bring data together. When you talk about the measurement, you have chosen a certain point on the four levels where you can see the impact of youth work on, and you pick one out of them, and you focus through a plan on data collection on that specific part of your work. And after that, you can analyze it, and then you can learn a lot about your own practice. And finally, in the end, when you evaluate all these data and analysis, you learn about your own practice, and you learned at what point you have which impact with your practice. And when you know that, very precise, then you can start communicating on that and adjusting your practice. And what we do believe that this is a learning process. When you start reflecting on your own practice throughout this kind of cycle, then you are able to better the quality of your youth work practice. So it's not only about taking these four steps, but it's very important to go through the full process. And that's what we learned throughout this research, that it's not only about bringing data together, taking the right tool to bring data together, and then you can show your impact. No. We are strongly convinced throughout the research and with practice in Flemish youth work that when you want to measure your impact, it's very important to go to the full process. Now, we want to come to some lessons learned, and of course, out of these lessons learned, there are some future questions. The research was for us a very important starting point to start discussions within Flemish youth work. and I guide you through some important lessons learned. We do think that impact is a trend. We can't stop it anymore. At this point, a few years after our research, a lot of Flemish youth workers are starting thinking about making their impact visible. This morning, I was in a meeting with the Ambrassade, and we are planning a big day on the 8th of May in 2025, where we bring all youth work organizations together to showcase their own practice on making the impact visible. So everybody is calling for action to prove the outcomes, effect, and impact of youth work, but who is working on it and makes it visible. We do think and are strongly believe that a lot of youth work organizations think about the idea, are strongly convinced that it's important, and start their own practice on that and learn from each other. So what we picked up in Europe, we brought it to Flanders and to the practice of Flemish youth work. Of course, it's not an easy question to show your impact, and motivation is key. And we do think that you have to start with the why and not with the how, and go in detail and find some nice tools. When you know why for your organization, for your practice, it is important to show the impact of your activities, then it's way more easy to start that process on making the impact visible. Third, we do think that there is a new mindset on it. We're working on the quality of youth work, and we do think that thinking about impact is a new way of looking to the practice, and not with the traditional methods of evaluation or accountability. But in the end, maybe it's no new wine in old bottles. Of course, we are strongly convinced that working on the quality of youth work is important, and the way to do it, we strongly believe that working on the impact is a more fundamental way of looking to that, instead of the old methods of quality evaluation. Of course, impact and making it visible is a very complex topic, and support of and knowledge building is very needed. Since working impact-driven combines experiential knowledge about the youth work practice, knowledge about the policy of youth work, and academic knowledge, to bring that all together is a very complex story. So we always stress out of this research that not every youth worker has to be an expert in impact measurement. A youth worker has to be an expert in working with young people. And in youth work organizations, it's enough that one staff member of one youth worker is, let's say, skilled in making the impact visible. But for us, the very important question with this is how we can support youth workers and youth work organizations in this complexity. And we started with that with, let's say, a learning network, with courses on that, and later on with our day in May, to work with youth work in Flanders on this complexity. And impact is a process. As I said, it's not one instrument that you have to use. It's not a one-tool-fits-all idea. No, you have to think about the variety, and you have to choose for the right tool, the right method, linked to the right goal of making your impact visible. We do need a learning community. As I said, we started a learning network in Flanders with, at this point, members of about 20 youth work organizations in the youth work field, and they're learning together. That's how we have a strong tradition in Flanders, in youth work field, that on this kind of topics we try to work together as much as possible so that we can learn from each other. So in the beginning of our research, we had a lot of haters, let's say, and throughout our research, more people are loving our research, but it doesn't have to do with are you pro or are you contra the idea of measure your impact. We do think that it's all has to do with the complexity and to make that simple. Of course, this is a very complex idea, but throughout our research, we succeeded in making the concept, making the methods, making the goals, making the outcomes from this more simple for youth workers. And when you are succeeding in doing that, they are able to handle that complexity in making the impact visible. So we are strongly convinced that when you make this complex idea more simple, that all youth workers are able to, at one point, for one goal, in one angle of our model, are able to show their impact. I do want to stop my story here. I hope we have given you a kind of an insight in our research, and maybe at this point there are some questions, or we can discuss a little bit more about this topic. And I showed a lot of questions on the plate, and maybe that's a starting point for some talks and discussions.
Thank you for that. And these are indeed very good questions. These were also communicated beforehand already to our participants, which is maybe people have this in the back of their mind. Just as a reminder for everyone watching, the Q&A panel is open, so it's on the top of your screen. And there are already some questions there that we can kind of start from, but do keep them coming. I would maybe first kind of take one question that there is connecting what you were talking about, impact here, and impact assessment and demonstration of impact. I think an interesting question is that is posed here is should the impact of digital transformation within projects or within youth work practice, for example, should that digital part be looked at, in your opinion, separately, or should it be part of generally the impact, looking at the impact of practice or a project in general? How do you feel?
Yeah, it relates a little bit about the idea of taking tools to show your impact. And since we are focusing on the process of making your impact, it all starts with a kind of a mindset within the organization. It starts with, is this important for us? And when this is important, you have to start that whole process. And this started with defining the goals. Why is it important? Then go further to think about at what specific focus we want to focus on, and then we can choose for tools. And all these different steps are very important to take them together with all the ones in your organization who are interested in. Of course, it's not the expertise of everybody involved. There, as we always say, is that it is important that at least one in the organization has a little bit of knowledge and expertise on this, but you try to establish a kind of a process within the organization. And I do think that then when you talk about the digital part, it's all in one package, let's say, and it's part of the process. Yeah, and that's the way we always want to stress. That's the way to go. We always stress when you're talking about the impact.
that does make sense. Thinking of your slide where there was the start, which was about the context and focus. I mean, some projects within Erasmus Plus, for example, they would have to focus on, let's say, testing a new piece of digital technology or a new approach to digital transformation and trying how that kind of enriches the practice that the organization already has. Then it would make sense to make the kind of metrics, the goals, the output, and the analysis really about the added value of that digital transformation practice. But of course, if you're looking at a project in general out in the world, you would look at the impact as a whole. It doesn't make sense to kind of really only look at the digital transformation component of it.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that does make it maybe difficult to kind of show that added value when we are in the stage where at least many organizations are, where we are struggling on whether to include digital transformation in our practice or not, whether it's within Erasmus Plus or elsewhere. Then we are, of course, struggling to kind of justify why we want to include digital transformation. And then again, we do need to demonstrate that impact separately. So maybe it's a bit of both, and depending on the focus.
Yeah, it's not that easy, but we do think then that the starting point is always important, to define where you want to have your impact and why you want to have your impact. And when you are more sure and precise on what you want to achieve, then we do think that it's more easy to shape the way to show your impact. And yes, I can imagine when you're talking about this kind of instruments, that the government is always, or the one who gives you the money for that, is always eager to ask you for, what impact did you generated? But at that point, we learned in Flanders that we don't want to talk about impact at that point. We're more talking about the effects, and then it's more in a box. When you talk about the impact, it's always on the long term, and then it becomes the buzzword. But when you focus it more on the effects, or even on the outcomes, that's what they want to what they want to know about very often. And to use these three steps: outcomes, output, effects, and impact. Maybe that's a good idea to think about what are we talking about.
I have the feeling, having worked now mainly in the European programs for a couple of years, but also before interfacing with a lot of projects in different roles, and also reading, excuse me, a lot of projects as a external evaluator. I feel like this question of demonstrating impact within specifically European projects is really tricky. And that's what a lot of organizations struggle with. Not all. Some are very, some, when you read projects, when you read either applications or you read reports of projects that have been funded and have finished, with some you see very clearly this process that you are describing, that organizations are really taking into account the whole process before even starting the thing. But then some projects, we see that they struggle with demonstrating impact in the sense also that they go directly often to impact. You see this will have these and these great impacts without looking, for example, these personal outcomes and community impact, which are much closer and often, especially for small scale projects, much more achievable. And I don't, of course, speak for the European Commission, but or national agencies as such, but I would believe that demonstrating even that in a cohesive way would speak a lot already on the viability of our projects. So my question to you is kind of connecting to what someone asked here, because it's tricky. Do you think it's mainly about understanding impact, or is it about communicating that impact? Which is the part that we struggle with as organizations, or is it something else?
Mostly, in my experience, it's easier to communicate about the impact. We are very good in storytelling, to tell about what we are aiming for in youth work, what is important for us. But to define more in detail what is our effect or impact of our practice, that's not that easy. And it starts with thinking about this on beforehand, before you start your activities. Most of the time, you start with an activity and start thinking about what is the effect of what we did today afterwards. But it's very important to think about it before you start your activity, and to define, maybe today we want to work on the personal outcomes of young people. Okay, how can we do that? How can we shape our practice? How can we shape our activity? And then it's way more easier to talk about it after the activity. So I do think that it's easier to talk and to tell about the impact than to define our impact. That means that we have to study on what is impact, on what different levels do we generate our impact, and there is a way to go for youth work.
This actually connects to another question that is on the board there, which I feel like your third point that is on the screen here, that impact-focused work puts reflection back at the center of your practice. I think it's very comforting in the sense that this really is also a lot about reflection and having those processes and that space and time in place in our process to really reflect on. But again, kind of jumping to this challenge from the viewpoint of the European programs, if and when every youth worker is not an expert in impact, as you say, and that certainly is the case, and that it should be allowed. We cannot expect that from everyone. Then how do we solve the issue of demonstrating impact for singular projects? Because obviously the projects need to be the ones to say that, look, we are applying for this and this is the impact that we are expecting or projecting. Question is what is the recipe for success there? Is it better guidance for what kind of description of impact to expect? Is it better frameworks? Is it better tools to actually demonstrate that impact, or is it something else? Where do we start in kind of building a better model of impact here?
Yeah, I think in our experience throughout the research, when we started with that, a lot of youth workers in Flanders are talking about impact as that's something strange. We don't know anything about it, and it's not valuable. But when you start talking about it, and when you start learning about what is this, how to handle this, then we experienced that youth workers and youth work organizations were more convinced about working with this kind of idea. So the support in training and introducing youth workers and youth work organizations into the story of impact is very important. Tools, we have a lot of tools, but how to handle them, you have to learn youth workers. That before using them, you have to think about why and on what level you want to focus on. So the most important thing is to shape a kind of a framework to introduce youth work and youth work organizations into the topic of impact.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense to me. And what resonates with me a lot in this idea of really looking at the process is what what we experienced with my previous employer in Finland during the pandemic, we realized that while youth workers are or youth work organizations are very adept at talking about the work that they do, going back to the structures or dismantling their work actually on the level of goals and objectives and the process itself was surprisingly hard. This was very true in the sense when they started asking, okay, the youth houses are closed because of COVID. How can we do this thing in an online environment? And they were just asking, how can we take the thing that we do already and take it as is to an online environment? And we often had to, of course, say, well, it's not really feasible. You can't. But what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? What is the impact in the community or in the outcomes for those young people you're working with? What is the impact you're trying to make? What is the objective? And it was surprisingly hard discussion sometimes, but it was really fruitful also for those organizations to start looking at the work that they do and then kind of figure out, well, how do we do this in this new reality, in this new environment? Yeah. So I think in that sense, it applies to digital transformation very well also.
Yeah, and it's back to the basics. Eh? Where is your starting point? Why are you doing youth work? Why is it so important for the young people you're working with? Eh? And working on the impact, force you a little bit to go more to that basics, and the way you are organizing youth work is a second one, eh? And that's what you are showing now with youth work during the pandemic. You have to rethink yourself as a youth work practice.
Yeah, and it's like you point out here in numbers 4 and 5, I think both, that you really need to do this kind of dismantling of the practice that you do so you can really demonstrate where to innovate or find those spaces to innovate and reinvent what it is that you do, maybe in terms of digital transformation, maybe in terms of more inclusive practice, maybe it's something else, maybe it's greener practice. But like finding those places where you can really heighten the quality, it requires this kind of disassembly first, looking at the process, as you say. Yeah. I'm looking at the time here. We are 10 minutes to 3 finish time, so we have to start wrapping up. But thank you for all the questions that were left there on the panel, and thank you so much, Gert, for your input.
Welcome.
I will be wrapping up, and I will show here quickly our final slide. So we are indeed, as I mentioned, we are in the last session. So we are doing other things next month. So we will unfortunately not have a digital dialogue session next month. But while you are waiting for the digital dialogues to start up again, you can check out our new video series, Sparking Digital Transformation. So these are interviews of people doing wonderful work across the field, and you can check them out already on our YouTube channel right now. With that, I wish you a very nice transition to possibly the end of the year holiday season. Probably there is a lot of work to be done before that for you as well. But we will see you in late January or early February in the next digital dialogue session. Thank you so much for joining, and see you online in the next ones. Bye-bye.